The C++ for loop is another one of the must-know control structures in C++. It's where we're primarily going to do a lot of our looping. I'm going to bring you through it and make sure you understand all the little quirks of the for loop in C++.
This is the second of my looping videos. In the first one, I talked about the while loop, and you need to know the while loop and you need to know the for loop if you're a first semester programming student. So if you haven't looked at my while loop example, I will link it in for you here. But let's go take a look at the for loop. Now this is a Visual Studio project, so to launch it I would double click on the Visual Studio solution. I already have the project open, so let's talk about it. I'm going to be solving the same problem I solved with my while loop example, but with the for loop it's a little bit messier. The for loop is primarily designated for looping a set number of times. That's when you want to use the for loop. The while loop is while this condition is true, keep going, and that's indefinite until something changes that condition to false. The for loop, you say 0 to 10, 0 to 100. You know how many times you want to loop. And that makes things a bit awkward in this program because we're going to have to ask the user how many grades they want to input. So the program starts out by saying, please enter the number of grades to input, and we get that input. This is going to be our ending condition. Let's look at the format of the for loop. So first you have the word for, and then everything that goes with the for has to be inside of a set of parentheses. And then just like the while loop, we have a body of the loop that starts with an open brace and ends with a closed brace. But we don't just have a condition inside of the for loop. We have an initialization which says for x equals 0. So x is going to get set to 0 when it comes into the loop for the first time. Semicolon. Now this is my ending condition. So as long as the variable x has a value that is lower than the number of grades, so if the user enters 3, as long as x is less than 3, we will stay in the loop. Now this is the increment. That means when we get to the bottom right here, it will do this. So x plus plus means x will starts out at 0, but then x is going to become 1. So now we know how many times we're going to loop. We're going to loop if the user types in 3, we're going to loop 3 times. So in the loop, we're just going to input, please enter grade number blank, input the grade, add it to the total. We don't have to keep track of the number of grades because we already asked the user the number of grades. So that's another difference. So let's run the program and see what it does. So I just hit the run button. Let me drag it on screen. I want to do 3 grades. I'll do the same data I did when I did the while loop, 100, 90, 80. And then it exited the loop, calculated the average, and said the average was 90. So as we step through this, let's remember how the for loop works. The very first time it comes down into your for loop, it does the initialization. So it's going to set x to 0. Okay. Then it's going to do the condition to see if this condition is true. Well, 0 is less than 3. That is true. So then it's going to do the body of the loop, which is input a grade, add it to total. When it hits the end of the loop right here, it's going to do the increment, which is going to add 1 to x. This is very typically what you see in a for loop. So each time we go around the loop, x is going to start out at 0, then it's going to become 1, then it's going to become 2. Well, 2 is less than 3, so it's going to stay in the loop, and then when x becomes 3 at the bottom of the loop, this condition will become false. It's going to drop out of the loop. We're going to calculate my average, and then I'm going to output the answer. Now, you did notice the quirk with this. where it will come up and say, please enter the number of grades, 3, and then it says, please enter grade 0. So once again, that is a quirk because we start at 0 for the number of grades, and we probably don't want to display that to the user. So what we could do right here is say x plus 1, oops, not 2, 1, so that it will, even though we're at 0 the first time through the loop, the user will see a 1, and that just makes it a little bit more understandable to the user. So let me step through this with the debugger. I'll put a breakpoint right here where we input the number of grades, and we will see how the for loop works. By the way, this is probably not the best name for a variable, but very traditionally in the C language and in a lot of programming languages, you make what's known as your loop control variable. This is the variable that's iterating, that's going up in value as we go through the loop. X. Just a lot of people do that. And why should I buck tradition? So I've got my breakpoint here on line 28. I'm going to start my program, and that's going to make it pause at the point where it says, please enter the number of grades. I actually have to trigger that statement by saying step over, and now I'll say 3. So once we're in here, you see we've got 3. X is going to start, right now X is uninitialized. X just has whatever value happened to be in RAM, but once it starts the loop, you'll see X got value. So it's going to say, please enter grade 1, which is X plus 1 is 0 plus 1 is 1. We're going to input that grade, and we'll type in the 100. So now we've got the 100. We add the 100 to the total, and now since it's at the bottom of the loop, it's going to automatically x plus plus, which means add 1 to x. So then it comes back up. Now you see x, as soon as I do this, there we go. Now x has a value of 1. 1 is less than 3, so it's going to stay in the loop and say, please enter grade number 2. I'll put in a 90. Oops, got a typo there. I'll tell it to continue. It adds the 90 to the total. Now we're up to 190. We're going to go back around to the top. It's going to do the increment. Now x has a value of 2, which is still less than 3, so the condition is true. So it's going to do my input, and this time I'll type in my 80. And then the 80 will get added to my total of 270. It's going to come back up and do the increment, x plus plus. So x became 3. Well, 3 is not less than 3, so that is a false condition. You see where the yellow arrow is now. It dropped out of the loop, and it's going to calculate my total. Now, and output it. And then we can see my answer now. The average of 3 grades is 90. Now, in the last video, I alluded to a bug in the code, and I did not explain it, so I'll explain it here. The problem we have is if we have 0 grades, we're going to try to do a divide by 0. So what we really need right here is an if statement. If number of grades, remember how we write an if statement from the earlier videos, equals 0, then we're just going to say the average is 0. Else, we'll do our calculation. So now we are protecting from a divide by 0 error. So that was the detail you have to worry about, because if something is 0, you can't divide by 0. So I've just put an if statement to handle that special case after I get out of the loop. And of course, anytime you make changes to your code, you want to hit save all. The green bar means that code has been changed. So my code has been updated on the hard drive. So to recap, here, let me get rid of that breakpoint. I'll click on the red circle to get rid of it. To recap how the for loop works, when you say for and you write a for loop, the first thing it does is the initialization. So that sets it to 0. Then we have a condition to keep me in the for loop. and then when it gets to the bottom of the loop, it triggers the increment, whatever you have right here, and it continues until this condition becomes false. Well, some of you might realize I could accomplish the exact same thing with a for loop as with a while loop. So let me pause the video and I'll do a little bit of editing here, and I'll change this for loop into a while loop that does the same thing. All right, so I have made a while loop that does the same thing as that for loop, but I have to do things manually. Like right here, before I go into the loop, I have to make sure x starts out at 0. Now my condition is while x is less than the number of grades. That's exactly the same. And then we're going to do the same thing in the body of the loop, but the while loop does not automatically increment x. So at the bottom of the while loop, I had to say x plus plus. So you can make a while loop do the same thing as a for loop. I could make a for loop do the same thing as a while loop. But if you know exactly how many times you need to loop, int num grades, use a for loop. If you're going to loop it until something becomes false or until something becomes true, while this is true, keep doing this code. Use a while loop. If it's an indefinite, read until end of file. While we're not end of file, read a record, process a record, read a record, process a record. That's when you want to use a while loop. Is this code correct? Does it work? Yes. Is the average Joe programmer going to write it this way? No, they're going to write a for loop if they know how many times they're going to loop. That's what you should do. You want to write your code like all the other programmers. So let me undo this back to the for loop. Here, I'll just use Control Z. Let me just keep undoing until I get back to what I had before. Almost there. Gotta love undo. And there you have it. So instead of using the while loop, I'm going to use the for loop, which says initialize my loop control variable to 0, check for my condition to end the loop, and then every time it gets to the bottom of the loop, it's going to execute the increment portion and say x plus plus. And that is the basic format of a for loop. If you like this video, please like and subscribe. If you'd like to get more first semester programming videos in C++, please like and subscribe, and take care.